talking to Carl Huxermeyer, and he is in the Bangweulu swamps in Zambia. Hello, Carl. How you doing?
Hi there, John.
Good to talk to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and what you're doing in the swamps?
Okay, so I'm a South African and I'm working in Zambia currently on fisheries management projects in the Bangweulu swamps in Zambia. So the Bangweulu swamps are a large, very big wetland area, part of the Congo River system. And there's a very large human population that's dependent on the ecosystem here for fishing and other natural resources. And I first came to the area in 2011 to study the fish, and I found the people and their culture here very interesting. A lot of similarities and contrasts with South Africa, and some of the things I've certainly noticed is the architecture and the lifestyle of this society, which does differ in many senses from much of the developed world, including South Africa.
And you said, being from South Africa, that you had already a certain insight and perspective into African vernacular architecture.
Yeah, so the area I grew up in is a rural area, and we had a variety of peoples who live in the province where I'm from, and each with their own fairly distinctive cultural aspects, which is then also reflected in the architecture.
Of course.
We had everything from colonial estate houses through to very old Boer settler farmsteads made with largely local materials, but reflecting certain architectural components imported from Europe, and then also the local indigenous inhabitants who have their own particular style as well. The Ndebele tribes just north of our province are well known for using colorful geometry.
Oh yeah, no, I've seen plenty of examples of that. It's very true. It's very beautiful.
And yeah, and in our area, it's very much adobe style buildings with wattled walls, sort of smooth cow dung and mud floors made by hand with a particular pattern. And there's been a lot of retention of some of the vernacular styles, but also obviously people use whatever materials are available, especially if there's poverty in the question.
Correct.
And then in Zambia, just the people are a lot more dependent on the resources that are immediately available to them. So
can you describe the architecture that's in your area? I know that being in the swamps, you talked about one specific structure, but more inland. Can you just describe the vernacular architecture a little bit for everybody?
Okay, so here in Zambia, the walls, the houses are usually small, square, with a thatched roof, and even this already reflects some influence from the colonial days when the practice of baking bricks, I believe, was introduced.
Correct.
The square houses, traditionally they would have been round rondables with a round roof. Primary reason being that it's easier to make a round thatched roof structure, and you still see this in some of the smaller buildings. However, the main houses always seem to be square, and there's a bit of variation, but otherwise it's pretty standard. And as soon as people can afford to, they replace a thatched roof with iron sheets for practical reasons.
Why do you think it's practical? I mean, I think that metal roofing is basically it's a status symbol. I've seen it in Zambia, where thatch works great if you do it properly. If you can afford to do, the proper thickness for thatch, the insulation values are incredible. And I just think I lived in a mud hut for 2 years, and I just thought it was a comfortable building. Would you agree with that about the metal, or it's practical because why?
I think the practicality stems from the fact that it doesn't need to be re-roofed. So there's labor quite a lot of labor involved with re-thatching every year, or every second year. But I mean, certainly a thatched roof is by no means an inferior roof, and in South Africa we have some of the biggest thatched structures in the world.
Yeah, they're gorgeous.
So yeah, so it's like you say, it's a status symbol. It shows that you have some expendable money, and I think it's just a major labor saving.
I can see that. I can see that. And you have a somewhat of a botany background. Is there anything you could tell us about the thatch that they use? When it's grown, how it's harvested, how thick, length?
Yeah, so the grasses that are used here in the village at least is called elephant grass. Mm-hmm. The botanical name is Hyperrhenia, and it is what we call a pioneer species. It grows in disturbed areas, so it often grows around villages where the natural vegetation has been disturbed through digging, deforestation, fires, and this grass takes, from the start of the rains in December, it starts to sprout, and by end of May, June, it's reached its mature size.
No, already by May and June. Okay.
Yeah, it can be between 2.5 and 3.5 meters tall. It's really big grass, and the stems can be as thick as a large finger.
Oh wow! Okay.
And people leave that grass until about August, September, when they cut it before the bush gets burned. So in many parts of Zambia that are populated, it's traditional to burn the grass when it gets dry. So people make sure that they harvest the grass first, they tie it into big bundles, and then they stack that in the homestead, usually on a frame so that it's off the ground to protect it from termites.
Right. And moisture.
Moisture too, I'm sure. And that's probably why they leave it up until August, September, when it really starts to get dry, because the grass is dry then. Mm-hmm. And then people start to rethatch their roofs fairly late. I noticed it was only just before the rain, so from early to mid-November that people started rethatching their houses.
Okay.
I don't know why they don't rethatch immediately when they've cut the grass. So it could be that they have some other important activity at that time.
Okay. Another question I have for you, Carl, it's kind of one of my major points, is that how long have you been in the swamps for? I forget what date you came.
Yeah, so in the beginning of 2011, I've been living and working up here in northern Zambia.
So you've seen 2 cycles of basically construction?
Yes, yeah. So I've seen, because to get to the station where I live out here in the park, I drive through 60 kilometers of village. Right. And these villages are all clustered along the road, and they also tend to be quite crowded because a lot of the area floods in the wet season. So the permanent villages or permanent settlements are crowded on land that stays dry. So it's about 60 k's of road to drive through, and obviously one looks out the window on that long.
Of course. Do you think that in your 2 years of observing, have you noticed that Western materials such as concrete blocks and metal roofs are coming even further and further into the villages?
Metal roofs, certainly, because they're now manufactured in Zambia.
Oh, wow.
They're becoming a lot less expensive. They're very thin. They're not very good quality, but they still seem to be favored. So people are gradually replacing, but it's only people who have a bigger income, so people who own a small shop in the village or a vehicle or something like that, or people who are on a salary like school teachers or other workers. That's the metal sheets. Then there's no concrete blocks, but there is more cement being used as mortar.
Gotcha.
Especially in floors.
And cement is also manufactured in Zambia.
That's right, but cement is still quite expensive, so one doesn't actually see that much cement unless it's used as mortar on a larger house that's going to get a tin roof.
So another one of my points is that African vernacular architecture is disappearing, and it sounds like maybe not so much the wall structure, but you're saying definitely the art of thatching is disappearing, really.
Yeah, well, to be honest, it seems people vary from area to area in the quality of their thatching style and technique as well. So we recently built a thatch structure at a tourist camp here, where we got a master thatcher in from Zambia, which is the area we used to work, and they selected a finer grade of grass, a much thinner grass. They combed out the grass and made a very tightly compacted, well-thatched roof. It could just be that people in the village are less selective about the type of grass, or they take the grass that's the least labor-intensive, so harvesting the long, tall grass that can cover a lot of the area. But as a result, that structures look a bit rough compared to a sort of brushed, compacted.
Sure. And do you also think it has to do with the thickness of the roof itself? I mean, it's kind of economy. You can build it this thick, or you can build it that thick. And actually, there's
yeah. So
good.
I think a lot of it is labor optimization, at least when it comes to thatching. So what I do certainly notice is that a lot of less labor seems to be going into the decorative style and the aesthetic aspects.
Right, right.
And I don't know what that is. If that's just generally a change in people putting less value on aesthetics, or I'm not sure exactly.
Very interesting. Carl, I have one last question for you. My goal is, as I said, documentation of African vernacular architecture preservation. Do you think that's an important goal?
I think so. I think there's an important cultural identity attached to architecture, and I think a lot of in Zambia certainly, there seems to be a bit of a problem of people feeling that their indigenous culture is inferior. This does vary between tribes. Some tribes are a lot more proud of their culture, and we see the same thing in South Africa, a difference between different language groups and tribes, and how much of their culture they keep and cherish. And I mean, the principles of aesthetics, proportion, all of that, I mean, it remains, that doesn't change across styles and cultures and things.
Right.
So I see in the more traditional things a lot very similar, proportionate, pleasing to the eye geometry, which seems to get lost as soon as people start making the change to neglecting the cultural aesthetics sense side of it. If that makes any sense.
No. It makes sense to me, Carl, definitely. Carl, I really appreciate you taking the time with me from Zambia. And again, just thank you.